Hey ANPers, this is Dr. Jones checking in. This is ANP1, Lecture Test 5, Video 1. Yeah, just starting out. Okay, so we are starting the nervous system. We will be covering the nervous system for Test 5 and Test 6, and also next semester for the first test for 2401 when we come back and talk about general and special senses. For now, let's talk about the systems in general. Let's get me out of the way. There we go. Okay, so there is a chart at the top of your, here you go, chart at the top. Let me get this out of the way. There we go. Okay, this is relevant for Test 5, maybe even more relevant for Test 6, and still relevant for Test 1 next semester. There is no part of this chart that you do not need to know by heart in your sleep. You know how it is when you're like, you've been studying so much, and you're trying to fall asleep, and you've got the list, like all but one, and that one that you can't remember is the one you'll never remember. Seriously, wake yourself up and go look it up so that you can get it on the test. Is it, unless that's just me. Yeah, no. Yeah, look it up. Okay, so here, should we go red? I'm not feeling red. Blue. All right, so first we have the group of sensory receptors. And I'm going to talk you through this chart. Because it carries the basic concepts of so much of what we're going to talk about for the rest of the semester, and then the first 3 or 4 weeks of the next semester too. So, yeah. So when I was in chiropractic school, we had trimesters, and we had school year round. And we'd go trimester and finals, and then 2 weeks off, and then trimesters, finals, 2 weeks off, trimester, finals, 2 weeks off, year-round school. But it worked out pretty well. So anyway, for each region, we did regional anatomy, not organ system anatomy like we're doing here. We did by region. Like I had a class called head and neck anatomy. I had a class called spinal anatomy, and for that trimester in that class, we studied the anatomy of the spine. Y'all remember the facet joints? At one time, I had the angles of the facet joints memorized as they changed down the length of the spine. Yeah, we're not doing that here. So we had anatomy, which is the what is it, what's it called, where is it, all that. And then the next semester for the same region, we had physiology, the how does it work. And then the third trimester, so for each body region, we covered for a year, the anatomy, the physiology. And the third trimester was the pathology, the how does it go wrong, what diseases develop, how do you diagnose for them, how do you treat them, yada, yada. And so, but the schedule got messed up. And so we ended up taking neuroanatomy and neurophysiology at the same time. But they weren't coordinated. So we were learning the what does it do of structures that we didn't know where they were. And we were learning the what is it of structures that we didn't know what they did. And none of it made any sense. And so those 2 classes, I worked my butt off, and I memorized the words in the order they went in. And I got the grades I needed, and I just literally memorized everything because it didn't make any sense. And then I started teaching this class and saw this chart, and there's a better picture of this chart in your book. It's figure 12.1, page 391. Originally, it wasn't in the lecture book, it was only in the Wood lab book. It's figure 23.1 in the Wood lab book. And I saw this and I was like, that's what they were talking about. Because I had 2 instructors that I'd had for other classes, and I knew them, and they were nice people, and I knew how to study their material. But I had 2 instructors that were speaking the same foreign language, and I was just doing the best I could, which is what you do. And then I saw the chart, and I was like, oh, why couldn't they have told me that at the time? So we're going to spend some time with this chart to make it easier for y'all. Okay, so the sensory receptors, there are 3 types of sensory receptors. The special senses, and these are all in your head. So sight, smell, taste, hearing, balance. Visceral sensory receptors, and your viscera are your guts. So visceral sensory is when you're hungry, when you're thirsty, when you gotta pee, when you need to poop, when you've been underwater too long, you need to take a breath, or you've been holding your breath too long, you need to exhale, okay? All of these sensations from your viscera, your organs, are your visceral sensory. And then somatic sensory is the body. So other than your special senses, your touch, pressure, vibration, how does your shirt feel on your arm, all of these things are somatic sensory. I said temperature, right? Yeah, all that. Okay. So all of this information is received at a sensory receptor, and it is sent. Let's see, this part here is the CNS, which we'll talk about in a second. And this part here, it's the central nervous system, which is on your note set, page 2, the central nervous system, CNS, which is the brain and spinal cord. That's what those blanks are. And then this one's the peripheral nervous system. See, the central nervous system is the central part, the brain, and then the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system are the cranial nerves that come out of the brain and the spinal nerves that come out of your spine. So it's the periphery, the edges. So peripheral nervous system. And the 2 parts there, the fill in the blank, are cranial nerves plus the spinal nerves. Okay, so the sensory receptors, which are, they send information on sensory nerves, which we'll talk more about later. But we will label them now. Sensory nerves through the peripheral nervous system to the central nervous system. So there are 2 parts of the peripheral nervous system. This part is the afferent division. And yes, it's afferent, but I'm afferent versus efferent, but I'm going to say afferent versus efferent just to make sure that you know that I mean that's an A. And I'll say efferent instead of efferent just to make sure that you know that I said efferent, spelled with an E. Okay, so the afferent division are all of this sensory information coming from the sensory receptors to the CNS, the brain and spinal cord. Brain plus spinal cord. And then what happens in the central nervous system? Information processing. So what happens if your somatic sensory receptors tell you that it's too cold, you're too cold? And that information gets sent to the central nervous system, and they decide, okay, well, it's time to put on the sweater. There you go, let's put on the sweater. So how do you do that? Well, the brain sends out on different nerves. There are sensory nerves going in and motor nerves going out. Central sensory nerves carry sensory information into the brain and spinal cord, and then motor nerves carry motor commands out from the central nervous system, from the brain and spinal cord. And so this is the efferent division. Afferent means towards and efferent means away from. So the efferent division carries these away from the central nervous system. And so this is also, the efferent division is the other half of the peripheral nervous system. So there are 2 parts of the peripheral nervous system, the afferent division, which is sensory information going into the brain and spinal cord, and the efferent division, which is motor commands coming out from the brain and spinal cord. Okay, so there are two parts of the efferent division. Okay, the one that moves your skeletal muscles is called the somatic nervous system, and this is abbreviated SNS. It's also called the somatic motor system. So what happened right there? My somatic sensory receptors told me it's too hot for this sweater now. And that information was sent on sensory nerves through the afferent division to the brain and spinal cord. And the information processing said, well, you're done with the example, so if you're hot, take the sweater off. And so those motor commands got sent through the somatic nervous system to my skeletal muscle, and boom, no more sweater. Okay, so we need to label this. These are the effectors. So like up here, we had a group of sensory receptors and we had 3 different types of sensory receptors. Here we have the effectors and we have 2 different types of effectors. We have somatic effectors. Soma means body. And they are the skeletal muscles. And what controls the skeletal muscles? The somatic nervous system. In fact, we've talked about the somatic nervous system when we talked about motor neurons, right? And we said that they end at a skeletal muscle at a neuromuscular junction. What neurotransmitter is released by these motor neurons at the neuromuscular junction with a skeletal muscle cell? You got it. ACH. Acetylcholine. Okay, we'll come back to that. All right, so we had sensory receptors, sensory information through the peripheral nervous system, the afferent division of the peripheral nervous system, to the CNS, which is the brain and spinal cord, for information processing. That makes a, air quotes, decision and sends motor commands through the efferent division. Now, if it's to put your sweater on or take your sweater off or scratch your nose, then it goes through the somatic nervous system or somatic motor system, SNS, to the somatic effectors, which are the skeletal muscle. I know there's a lot of terms, but these terms are relevant for the next 3 tests, so it is absolutely worth your time to wrap your head around this. You're going to need this. Okay. The other bit is less straightforward. It's the autonomic nervous system, which is the ANS, and this is the somatic motor system. This one is the visceral motor. And it controls the visceral effectors, which include smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, glands, and adipose CT. And there are 2 ways to control them, the sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division. The sympathetic division is also called fight or flight, sometimes fight, flight, or freeze. And then the parasympathetic division is rest and digest. Some call it feed and breed, but I'm going with rest and digest. Okay, so there are 2 ways for the ANS to control these visceral effectors. What does sympathetic activation do to cardiac muscle? What's cardiac muscle? It's your heart. So what does fight or flight do to your heart rate? Whoop, it increases your heart rate. What does rest and digest do to your heart rate? So this is fight or flight is, you know, that like when you're like almost in a car wreck or in a car wreck and that adrenaline rush and then you're like shaking, that's sympathetic division, that's fight or flight. And then if you're like sitting on the couch, relaxed, surrounded by your family and like just watching TV, that's parasympathetic, that's rest and digest. Okay. Have I marked all this up yet? Okay. All right. Okay, let's fill in the rest of this page and then we will call this video. We will come back to this chart. I absolutely expect you to memorize this thing, and that's why the top of page 3 is a blank version of this chart. So you can print out just that page if you need to, put it in a clear plastic sheet protector, mark it up with some ultrafine dry erase markers, check your spelling, wipe it, and do it again until you know this off the top of your head. And we're going to be adding terms to this chart as we learn them. So I've held back and only given you the basics with this. Yes, I know, it's a lot. I'm sorry, but we need to know. Okay, so back to the note set. Okay. Oh wait, I went ahead a couple pages. There we go. Okay, so the central nervous system is the brain and spinal cord. We've said that. Here's a picture of the brain, mid-sagittal section of the brain. You are learning all of these terms in lab. There's very little on here that you are not going to need to know. Okay, do not get behind in lab 4. Do not stop studying lab 4 to do lecture test 5. They work best together. Please do lecture and lab every day, every day, every day, every day, every day. There's a lot of new terms and they're all rando. I mean, you've heard of like a liver and like the femur and biceps, and you've heard these terms before. And maybe you've heard like the corpus callosum, but this is the choroid plexus and the lateral aperture, and a lot of these terms are very new, very different. So please keep up with lab. Okay, I said it. And then the cranial nerves, and we are learning the cranial nerves by location on the brain, and we are learning both the Roman numeral and the name of all the cranial nerves. So again, need to know. The spinal nerves, we're not learning like these, the roots and plexi and brain, all those. We're not learning that. So, oh look, they're spinal nerves. Yay. I'm good with that. Oh, and these together, the cranial nerves and spinal nerves, are sometimes called peripheral nerves. But peripheral nerves is not specific enough to get you credit on a lab test, so we're clear. Or even a lecture test. And on a lab test, if it's a spinal nerve, then you need to say, oh look, that's a spinal nerve. And on the lecture test, then you need to say, oh, that's olfactory. Cranial nerve, Roman numeral 1. And it does need to be in Roman numerals. Okay. So peripheral nerves is the general term for both of these together, but it's not for credit on the lab test. So we're clear. And then back to this chart that I've already marked up. Okay, so the divisions of the peripheral nervous system. Now I'm switching to red so you know where I am. So the first bullet is the afferent division of the peripheral nervous system. So this line here is supposed to separate the central nervous system from the peripheral nervous system. The second bullet is the efferent division of the peripheral nervous system. and then you see an indent and then like a hollow bullet. Okay, so there are two parts of the efferent division. They are the somatic nervous system, the SNS, and it controls the skeletal muscle. The second hollow bullet there is the ANS, the autonomic. Now look at this word. This is not automatic. This is autonomic. And there are two parts to the autonomic nervous system, and they are the sympathetic division, which is fight or flight, and the parasympathetic division, which is, did you all just say feed and breed? Oh my goodness. Okay, rest and digest. Fine. And together, they control the visceral effectors, which are smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, glands, and adipose. Okay, well, that was Noteset page 2. So this has been A&P1, lecture test 5, video 1, with material that's relevant for test 5, test 6, and also a little bit 2402, test 1. So, of all the need to know that we are covering, this is need to know. Like, there's no part of the rest of this semester and like the first month of next semester that you do not need to know this. Okay, you've been warned. Thank you as always for tuning in. Now I need to find my keyboard so that I can turn the video off. What just happened? Okay, we'll do that next. You can do this. Keep on keeping on. And let me say, I would like for each of you for the rest of the semester to not only learn the material, but focus on tweaking your study strategies to how you study best. So if you feel like your study strategies are working for you and you know like what to tweak to take it up a notch, because I got to tell you, for test 5 and test 6, you need to take it up a notch. Okay, so if you know how to take it up a notch, if you know what you want to try next, do that. If you don't know what to do, then join me on an office hour. My office hours, the semester I'm recording this, are Monday through Friday, noon to 1, and there's a Teams link, the semester I'm recording this, on both the welcome page and every week's quick start guide announcement. So come and chat with me during office hours, and we will work on tweaking your study strategies to best fit how your brain learns. And sometimes you have to try things, and every test is an experiment. You try this, try that, try the other, and see what works best for you. Okay, you can do this. Keep on keeping on. Dr. J out.